Hello and welcome to another video. Um, this week we've got some fun that we can have after Monday's short and sweet thesis for why the Civil War started, because like we know the outcome of the Civil War. The Union is going to win, but what happens during the war gives us a lot of opportunity to kind of like dive in a little bit deeper about some of the things that influenced the outcome of the war. So this is what this video is going to do. It's going to preview a lot of different things, important individuals and factors that contributed to the outcome of the Civil War. And I'm going to use this video to cover some of President Lincoln's actions during the Civil War um, that will really allow us to, examine his presidency uh, for both good and bad. Because when you look at presidential actions, we don't want to put everybody on a pedestal and just say, "Oh, this person was perfect." And I hope this video kind of outlines why some people think Lincoln's actions during the Civil War were very much debatable. So let's just get into it. Obviously, the first one there is Abraham Lincoln. He did keep the Union together. The Emancipation Proclamation is something that we look back on in history and seeing how a presidential action can make some pretty substantial social changes. However, like once you look at the decision and what it did, it really didn't do anything other than free the slaves in the parts of the country that were going to war against the United States. His speeches are important. I'm sure if you want to study the Gettysburg Address in terms of what it did, it's one of the reasons why I take pride in, like, when you guys write for me, I want it to be short, I want it to be sweet, and I want it to actually mean something. And that's what the Gettysburg Address was. It was not a long speech at all. Ulysses S. Grant is a general during the Civil War for the Union. He's going to be somebody that's going to be essentially in the background for a majority of the war. It's going to be in the West. Like if you take a look at the war, a lot of it does happen on the East Coast of the United States in battles like Gettysburg, Antietam, Bull Run, the beginning of the war at Fort Sumter. But Ulysses S. Grant's actions out west, specifically taking Vicksburg in the Mississippi, really helped the Union lock up the victory in the war. Robert E. Lee is somebody that is interesting to me because some of you are going to go to Washington, D.C. when you're in high school. And when you go to Washington, D.C., one of the spots that you go to is Robert E. Lee's former home. His home got turned into the big cemetery there in Washington, D.C. It's called Arlington Cemetery, where um, soldiers who have fought in wars for the United States are buried there. And it's a very hallowed ground. It's very, very interesting to see. But he was actually the big bad of the Confederacy. And even to this day, people look up to Robert E. Lee in terms of what he did during the war, in terms of keeping the fight going for the Confederacy. His leadership is definitely one of the most revered things of the Civil War, if that's something that you want to study. William Tecumseh Sherman, he is a guy from the very beginning of the war saying this is going to be a long war. This is not going to be short and sweet, because a lot of people thought the Union would just crush the Confederacy like very, very fast. And he was saying, no, no way. There is no way this is going to be a short war. Um, and he is going to rise to leadership in the Union, and he's actually going to lead this thing called the March to the Sea, which was a very controversial war tactic during the war that led to uh, the South essentially being broken um, by his tactics. So William Tecumseh Sherman, definitely somebody that is important in the war. Other individuals, I got to bring up Frederick Douglass again. This guy is going to be in Lincoln's ear all the time. He's going to be making speeches saying that we should use black soldiers, we should free the slaves. And Abraham Lincoln pushed back on what he was trying to say for a long time until we won at Vicksburg and essentially inspired Lincoln to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. I'm going to go ahead and give him that credit too. Clara Barton is a nurse who became extremely important during the war because she improved battlefield medicine in a variety of ways. She also helped found the American Red Cross. Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy. And if I'm honest, that would be one of the interesting things for you to study this week. And how the Confederacy essentially copied and pasted the U.S. Constitution and created another country. And I'm not one to say that the Confederacy had a lot of rights. I'm somebody with a Civil War Union tattoo on me. I'm very much pro-Union, anti-Confederacy in all shapes and sizes, but it would be probably good for you to understand who Jefferson Davis was, what the Confederacy stood for you to really appreciate some of the parts of U.S. history that aren't always positive. I'll just say that with old Jefferson Davis. Harriet Tubman, in a couple of classes last week, we watched a video about Harriet Tubman. She was, I can't say that on school videos, but she was pretty cool. I about said something that would have gotten me in trouble, but she was really awesome. She was a main conductor on the Underground Railroad. If that's something that you want to study, the Underground Railroad, she did operate it during the Civil War, and she also led a military raid that freed a lot of slaves. So if she is somebody that you want to look more into, I'm all for it. Uh, Moving forward, this is a list of individuals that were in charge of the Union. One of the interesting parts of the Civil War is how crappy the Union leadership was. And you compare that to the Confederacy, and Robert E. Lee is going to be the leader of the Army of Northern Virginia that will produce the infamous Confederate flag. But it's actually, for me, the Union Army in their search for a leader that is very interesting. And you see a bunch of names here, and I'm just going to go through a little bit because you can, read through as I'm talking here. Starts off with Winfield Scott. Winfield Scott is going to be an infamous general in the Mexican-American War. But as you'll notice, the war starts in 1861, and he was already an old man in 1848. And he was somebody that couldn't even get on a horse. So he quickly retires, but he was credited with the, quote, Anaconda Plan, which cut off the Confederacy from outside trade and outside help. So I'll give him that. The next guy on the list is somebody that I freaking despise. I'm not afraid to admit that. General George McClellan. Um, he was he was the type of kid that says he's really smart and then has that like idea stuck in his head that I'm smarter than everybody else, and ultimately didn't do anything with it. He was a really good organizer. I'll give him that. They nicknamed him the Little Napoleon, but he had this huge army and he wasn't doing anything with it. And Lincoln would constantly say, dude, go attack, do something, anything. He was like, nope, I don't want to. And there's a really good documentary series. I wish we could just, watch it in class, but it's a bit rough. Um, you've got to have a love for U.S. history. It's called The Civil War by Ken Burns. If you have access to PBS, watch that sucker. It's really good. Um, but in that series, it talks a lot about George McClellan and how he did not want to do what Lincoln wanted. He thought Lincoln was too aggressive, but he's one of the types of people that if you look back on history and go like, what if he actually attacked when he didn't, when he sat back and yeah, not great. He would also eventually run against Abraham Lincoln in the 1864 presidential election because, yes, we did have a presidential election during the Civil War, and he was the Democratic candidate that ran against Lincoln. He got his butt kicked, but he's somebody that was very famous at the time and obviously worth talking about, even though your teacher hates his guts historically. All right, I don't have time. Henry Halleck is another guy, um, but he wasn't a great battlefield leader. The guy next on the list, Ambrose Burnside, um, was also the commander of the Army of the Potomac. Did not do a lot of good planning and had a lot of high casualties. And this, like Burnside's time as the Union general, kind of shows you how nasty the war was. So he was replaced um, in 1862. Another guy, Joseph Hooker, came in 1863, lost the Battle of Chancellorsville, even though he had a larger army, which again shows you the importance of military planning during the war. And the next guy, George Meade, he was known as a Little Turtle. He was a kind of a smaller looking guy. He did get credited for the win at Gettysburg, major turning point, but he didn't pursue um, General Lee in the aftermath of Gettysburg, and again, it prolonged the war. Um, so you can see just the straight up list of people, the amount of people that Lincoln had to hire and fire until the end of the war. Um, this slide is all about other important factors that led up to the that were occurring during the Civil War. Sorry, I've already talked a little bit about the Emancipation Proclamation, and the key thing there is again, it only freed the slaves in the Confederate parts of the country, the ones that had already seceded, that were an open rebellion against the United States, and it really shifted the war in terms of like Lincoln is going to be big and constantly saying we're going to keep the Union together, keep the Union together. Um, and yeah, the Emancipation Proclamation shifted the tone. It's now not just about keeping the Union together. It's now about when the Union does get back together, we're not going to have slavery around anymore. Maybe in the sentence that you wrote on Monday, and if you're watching this on a Sunday, your job tomorrow is to write one sentence for the cause of the Civil War, right? Um, it can't be understated. The industrial strength of the North allowed them to move supplies, make supplies a whole lot faster. Um, New weapons were produced at a greater rate compared to the South, and that's one of the kind of the nasty parts about the Civil War is that it was, for me, arguably the first modern war that involved a lot of things that regular war would not have had not have been a part of. You know, battles used to be set pieces, like if you read about the Battle of Bull Run, which is right outside of Washington D.C. and like when you're if you ever drive to Washington D.C. The route that you'll take in high school doesn't go through Bull Run, so you'll have to go to this separately. People literally showed up to watch. They had popcorn and everything. They were just looking like, okay, this will be a fun little battle. And after that battle, people realized, oh crap, this isn't going to be fun, nor is it going to be a short war, so this is going to suck. But one of the reasons why the Union was able to hang on is because of the industrial strength of that part of the country. The naval blockade, aka the Anaconda Plan, it blocked southern ports, cut off southern trade, weakened their economy, and actually stopped the Confederacy from getting outside help. If you remember, the United States got help from France in our struggle with England in the American Revolution. And the Union leaders knew that, and they really did everything they possibly could to, cut off the Confederacy from outside trade. The control of the Mississippi River is going to be extremely important. This is actually where I get my tattoo from. You can probably see it better in class. But the control of the Mississippi River was an extremely important part of this war, simply because it's how a lot of supplies moved inland. We didn't have paved roads. We had rivers, canals. So if we controlled the rivers and canals, we could control the war. Next up is basic technology, railroads and telegraphs. The North had a better telegraph system, and this is actually something that Lincoln would just obsess over. Like back in the day, it used to take a long time for news to spread, and Lincoln would be paying attention to telegraph messages coming in from various parts of the country during the war just to kind of get a snapshot on how the Union was doing. And that's one of the reasons why Lincoln ages so much during his presidency, is because he was under a great amount of stress. The use of African American soldiers, this did not happen early in the war because, again, the North did not want slaves to be a part of regular society. So a lot of African Americans were kept out of the war. But with Frederick Douglass constantly in Lincoln's ear, we did eventually get African American soldiers, which, one, increased the Union's numbers in their armies, and two, made people realize that African Americans were not just going to rebel against everybody because they were treated as property for 200 plus years, but instead they can be a part of our country, and in fact they can fight for our country too. We don't want to forget about the home front, women and civilians participation in the war. I've already talked a little bit about about Clara Barton and her efforts to, as a nurse, to improve battlefield medicine. So we don't want to underrate that. And then finally, Gettysburg and Vicksburg. These are a couple of different battles that were also turning points in the war. So again, if you want to choose a battle to research, I'm perfectly okay with that. We'll probably look at more into Gettysburg and other nasty ones like Antietam, like Chancellorsville, that really do show how nasty this war was. Also want to briefly mention some of the things that Lincoln did. He never once, as president, acknowledged Southern states leaving the Union. He never legally said, yep, you're allowed to leave. We just got to get you back now. No, he always thought that the Southern states that seceded from the Union were just part of our country. And this is kind of what makes Lincoln so good as a president. It's like he was very forceful. He was very blunt in what he wanted, but he always knew that it was just like, all right, let's get back together. And when we get done with testing next week, when we get back and we're looking at Reconstruction, one of the first things that I want to do is study Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction. Like his actions were very, I can't say it enough. They were direct, but they were also very calm. The Union called up for volunteers. There wasn't a draft immediately in the Civil War to fight the Confederates, but he did call for 75,000 troops. And he really, as commander in chief, despite his lack of military experience, he did a wonderful job in mobilizing the Union Army to stop the rebellion. One of the reasons why Lincoln gets critiqued is that he suspended habeas corpus. What habeas corpus means is that if you ever get arrested, you have a right to show up in front of a judge, to have your case be heard, to, have justice move along quickly. But Lincoln actually arrested a lot of people that were trying to get people to go fight for the Confederates, or to, say how the Union was bad and how it was too aggressive. Um, he actually held a lot of people that were dissenting against the United States in jail without going before a judge. And that is one of the reasons why um, Lincoln's actions during the war can be a bit tyrannical. And there were people in his cabinet that were thinking very much that was the case. And again, he always emphasized that the main goal of the war is to preserve the United States. We're not going to be separated, um, and we're going to do everything possible to get everything back to where it was. And he constantly was talking to people that were Democrats, that were from the North, about why it was important to stay in the Union. His vice president, at least when he got reelected in his second term, was actually a Democrat, somebody not in his political party. So it's one of those things where, as a class, if you remember, studying Washington's cabinet back in January, the people that he had in his cabinet did not always get along with each other, right? Same thing with Lincoln. His cabinet was full of people that A, didn't like Lincoln, and B, did not like each other. So again, his actions as president were mainly to keep the Union together. Other things that he did, he used executive power to keep border states like Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri from joining the Confederacy, which led to us controlling those resources. Um, Obviously, the Emancipation Proclamation, I've already talked about that. Eventually, after being bothered by Frederick Douglass so much and having his mind change, he did eventually allow African Americans into the military to fight for the Union after the Emancipation Proclamation. He wanted strong leaders in the military. I mean, his final general was Ulysses S. Grant. And the only reason why he liked Grant, he liked Sherman, was they fought. Even though there were a lot of issues, like personal issues with Grant, in terms of his, we'll just call it substance abuse. But he wanted strong military leaders, and I hope that list earlier in the video kind of gives you an idea about what I mean by that. Had a lot of speeches, obviously, the Gettysburg Address, and his second inaugural address is actually quoted on the City Hall statue of Lincoln, with malice towards none. Charity for all is one of those quotes that came from the second inaugural address. And then again, I can't stress this enough. He held a presidential election during a very substantial part in our country's history. And again, it just shows you how much he was committed to continuing on the traditions, the social contract that our government is based on. Can't understate that enough. So that is a big fat buffet of actions by Lincoln, important individuals, and I'm asking you to choose a couple this week. One action and one one factor. And you don't need to study Lincoln. You could if you wanted, but there's a lot of other people. There's a lot of battles. There's a lot of factors that I would love for you to, by the end of the week, have a lot of information that you can do research on your own from. And obviously, that's what we're going to do in class, and I'm going to help you get there. Because the big goal for this week is just to understand what the heck's going on in the Civil War, and more importantly, how it was won. So, other things that we'll be doing in class this week, you will be getting reading style quizzes, like common lit articles. Some will be about the Civil War, some will be about not, just because I want to get you and your brain ready for the I Learn next week. So I'll sign off here. I hope you have a great week. I'm going to just publish this video now, so at some point this week you can hear all of that. You don't have to use class time to do it because we'll have other things that we'll be doing. Um, in class as well, like those reading quizzes. So I'll wrap this up. Love you all, and good luck this week. Hopefully you learned some stuff. Let's get ready for that I Learn next week. Let's go. All right. Love you. Bye.